Welcome to Week in Review. The midterms are 2 weeks behind, but you know what? There's still much confusion. There's many that are perplexed, baffled. I talk to them, and you know what I'm talking about. God's shaking everything that can be shaken, but we want to advance His kingdom, and in the midst of this, learn lessons. I'd like to give you 10 reasons why we missed it, and I'd like to also add the number one way we win it. When I say we, I'm talking of traditional conservatives with a biblical worldview who have common sense solutions to today's issues versus those that would say they're more of a progressive orientation, leftist, globalist, socialist, Marxist, communist that are trying to topple and bring forth some kind of new country. So I jot this down, and I think it's important. Sometimes it's good. We want instant analysis, but when you have a time to marinate and think, here's the 10 reasons I think the Dems really came out strong. Number one was this. I thought the independent voters, they gained by 28 points. They were influenced and came out in favor of Dems. How about this? Women. Women were influenced. They were scared about abortion and that they'd be thrown in jail. And the Dems emphasized that. Number three would be what? The January 6th emphasis. You know, democracy is doomed and we've got to rescue it. Insurrection. A lot of influence in that area. Number four was this, the giveaways. Not just the student loans, but people brought in the country, immigrants, come on in, freebies. And so there's that entitlement, and boy, we're ready. Santa Claus, give me all I can get. We'll stand with you. Then you also had this, number five, I think would be this. There was a sense of, in certain states and cities, strong arms from the union. Yeah, emphasis, pressure. You say, how could Philadelphia, and Pennsylvania go a certain way? Well, it's like basically Philadelphia. That's the stronghold, strong union base. That's why a certain man that people said he looked like a wrestler, had a stroke, could barely talk, and yet he wins. He's the new senator for the next years. Well, Philadelphia. You look at Chicago. You look at Baltimore. You can just look at certain places, strong union emphasis. New York. Another reason was media manipulation and push. There was a lot of money spent on ads, and there was a lot of demonizing and smearing of individuals. Number seven, I think, is this. The Dems emphasized, you better be careful. You're going to lose Social Security and Medicare. People were influenced by that, low information voters. Number eight was this. The election fraud issue that always comes up. I've just got back from California. And what's there? Man, anybody, immigrants, you can vote. And so you have problems and no ID is needed. And so lagging time, it's like what? Florida, somehow they get the votes counted. Everything's done in 6 hours, 6 hours. And then we have states that are still going week after. Well, bad. And then you also have this one. How about this? Number 9. I would say massive funding, a lot of money that was spent by individuals. 2 candidates that go blown out, but $150 million for certain leftist candidates in Georgia and Texas. And then the last one I would say is this. Number 1, and this is the most important, unity. The Dems somehow managed to pull together, move in lockstep, and as a result of that, the Republicans today say, we're missing it on that area. And I say this is the number one way we win. There is a principle of unity where there's power, there's strength. And where there's division, there's going to be what? Weakness. I think it was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, we have to learn to work and live together as brothers or we're going to perish as fools. And it's true. That word team, we've got to be a team, T-E-A-M. Together, everyone accomplishes more. Well, there's individuals like Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri says, this is the end of the old Republican Party. There's got to be change right now. Unity. Now, let me tell you why this is important. When this nation was founded, do you remember? What did the founding fathers say? We pledged together our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. There was a unity. You could see it. You see it in sports when there is unity. I look out at the end, maybe NFL. The New England Patriots with Belichick and Brady. They have the most Super Bowl appearances, I think, and wins. And then what about when you look at a team like Alabama? I've been there. I've met Nick Saban. You may not like Alabama Roll Tide, but the man knows how to keep his team together. They run out. He comes out, even at his age, into the games. They're having an off season right now, but you can see the unity in that team. Roll Tide, people don't like it, but that's probably the greatest coach in history. I remember when I would speak at the chapel services of the Washington Redskins. Do you know in a decade, they went to the Super Bowl 4 times under Joe Gibbs, and he would have them gather the night before. We'd all come together, and I remember it. Unity was stressed and was emphasized, and they won 3 out of the 4 times they went. How about in the NBA? Remember the Chicago Bulls winning 6 championships in a decade? Michael Jordan, the coach Phil Jackson, Scottie Pippen, unity. You see it in music. I'm listening to an audiobook right now by Mr. Bill O'Reilly, and he's dealing with John Lennon, Elvis Presley, and you know who else? Yeah, I'll tell you one more. This was interesting, Muhammad Ali. And it's interesting when you talk of music groups, the Beatles, the greatest in all time, and yet what happened? Yoko Ono got involved, John Lennon gets on, heroin. I mean, he was a mess, and the Beatles break up. But you see the Bee Gees, they were brothers, they stood together. Then you had a group called the Kinks. I remember they were a favorite group of mine, but the 2 brothers couldn't get along, and so they dissolved. Unity, you can see it in everything. You see it in churches and in Christianity. I was part of a movement. For, 15 or more years, we were making such an impact, a magazine, church planning and everything. But then we started to see certain individuals pushing a more authoritarian type leadership, certain doctrinal emphases we started to see. We started to see also individuals saying, this is the way it's going to be. It's kind of like the high road, take it or make your way out. So individuals like me and Cheon and Lou Engle and others, we departed. And things started to fall apart. Our home base, 3,500 at one time. You know what? It went down to about 500. Used to be about 20-some leaders, went down to about 3 or 4. I mean, it was just tragic. Out of the 10 major leaders, 1 left really in leadership position. You say, Larry, I can see it. Well, this is the same thing that's true with political parties. And you know what? The Republicans, it's time. Now, let me tell you this. There is a problem that's brewing. You say, well, what is it? The problem is this. The media wants to fan the flames of a feud. Between who? Well, Donald Trump. He's making, he's in the place. Announcement, run again. And then Governor DeSantis. After the midterms, Mr. DeSantis, and I want you to know, I respect both of these men, and I admire them. But things aren't going to end well if there is a divisive approach and they're against each other. There could be a protracted primary where people are feuding and then people bow out and say, I'm not going to vote anymore. My guy didn't get it. And so we see it. What happened after the midterms? Do you remember? Mr. DeSantis skyrocketed. He said, woke comes to Florida and dies. And his treatment of Disney and what they did in terms of school boards, and he wins by 20 points. And all of a sudden people are saying he should run for president. Maybe he's the one. Man, Trump is done. Let's get this guy. And then here was Donald Trump. And what happens with him? He's looking and he's seeing this and the comments are coming. And then he makes some what I would say are ill-advised remarks. He'll say, Don, DeSanctimonious and then all of a sudden Rupert Murdoch, who owns, Wall Street Journal, New York Post, Fox News, they start making comments. DeSantis is the winner now, and Trump is the loser. And so Trump is a fighter. He's a New York businessman, and he lashes out, and he can make statements. There's trouble brewing. So what do? Well, we go back to the principle of unity. There's got to be give and take, and we've got to say what's good for the country. Now, let's take a look. With Mr. Trump, I think of this. In the Old Testament, you remember when Saul saw David arise on the scene and the women were singing and dancing, and then he said, Saul is, has beaten his thousands, but David, his tens of thousands. And it said an evil spirit entered into Saul. He felt threatened. He was tempted, and his heart was revealed. And you know what? It can be the same thing if you're Mr. Trump today and you see a rising star like DeSantis. Well, what about with Mr. DeSantis? Well, the same thing. The Bible says lay hands on no man suddenly, and somebody can skyrocket, and then they can become very popular. And then all of a sudden you begin to say, is it time to put on the brakes? Is this good? Should there be a feud? Or could there be teamwork and come together? Well, as I talk to people, I really believe that would be the ideal. Now, let's say this. In Luke chapter 16, Jesus said this. He said, faithful in serving another you're given that which is your own. I would submit this is something for Mr. DeSantis to think about. Have a servant heart. Now, it could mean that he'd have to move, one of the two, Trump or DeSantis, but if they were together, could you imagine that? And then if he served, let's say if he was VP, and then once that 4 years is done, he could have another 8 years. And same thing now, you look at Mr. Trump and you say, it doesn't foster goodwill when there's criticisms and statements made against Mr. DeSantis. So we need discipline on his part, and he needs to be careful as his heart is revealed in the midst of this. Jesus said in Matthew 12, a house divided against itself cannot stand. Not might not, not may not, it can't. And he said there, no home or kingdom, really, or city can stand if there's division. Satan is the one that promotes it. And you know, his kingdom is united. You read in Matthew 12 where it says, Jesus said, if Satan's kingdom was divided, how would it stand? So what are we to do? I think we need to pray like never before. We need to pray for these two men who I believe most of us say these are really winners. And look at what Mr. Trump did for this country. Look at what Mr. DeSantis did. And can you imagine, just take a picture, imagine if, let's say in Georgia, you know, they were holding up their arms together. Mr. Trump, Mr. DeSantis, Herschel Walker, the governor. I believe that would send a message. Unity is strength, but division is weakness. Let's pray like never before. It's a time for unity in the party that says we stand for traditional conservatism. We stand for that which we trust is really for the best of this country. Let's stay together.